and jacks. A diesel generator and air compressor. Air cushions taken from his father's 50-foot trawler. Snatch blocks and spare chain. Heavy-duty rope and steel cable. Bridles and skates and arrow sticks. A shovel and broom and tarpaulin. A toolbox and first aid kit. There was a whine that became a throaty roar, and Lee took the wheel and stared in the wing mirror until he saw the riders. He was rolling at 100, but they were coming on him. 2 riders in black leathers, floating through the silver heat mirage and leaning into the banking turn. Lee reached under the seat for his father's Luger pistol. Before his father owned it, his grandfather had ratted it from a German officer in North Africa. His grandfather had pointed it at the German officer and, because they were instructed not to take prisoners, had tested it on the officer's brainpan. The pistol was Lee's father's favourite. He brandished it at meetings and fired it down at the gun club and disassembled and cleaned it whenever he needed to think. Lee drove one-handed with the pistol aimed at his feet and looked back at the riders who'd moved out of single file and were now in tandem. He flicked off the safety and fingered the magazine that was supposed to hold 8 rounds, but because of the tight spring only held 7. The riders were signalling to one another. Lee's instinct was to speed, but the truck was top-heavy and cornered badly. He eased his foot and slowed to 80, and then 70, and held the pistol and calmed his breathing. The Luger was semi-automatic, and if he wasn't careful he'd shoot out the magazine in seconds, and then he'd be unarmed. The road dipped into the crazed pastel colours of the coastal woodland. The only movement ahead was a raven swimming in the watery mirage with roadkill in its beak. Lee could see the city as a brown smudge on the southern horizon, and then the bikes were alongside him, and then they were ahead, and he didn't recognise the twin BMWs or the riders whose panniers were full of camping supplies. They were soon out of sight, and Lee immobilised the pistol and slipped it under his seat. To steady himself, he checked the gauges and dials. Temperature and oil pressure were fine. His speed was regular. Another kilometre clicked over on the trip meter. 300 so far. The fuel gauge was the only problem, headed toward empty. The V8 engine was thirsty, and he only had $45 in his pocket. The plan was to hit the freeways as soon as he got to the city and hopefully snag a tow. The rig rattled and the suspension creaked and the sun was warm on his arm. He liked the colour of his skin when it got a belting of sun. The regular creamy chocolate milk colour went a deep iodine red. It was the same colour as his father's skin that was year-round reddish-brown, like the dirt in their yard, and which made the black of his father's hair and the blue of his eyes more startling real. Lee began to pass cars coming the other way, overtaking the long-haul road trains headed to the Pilbara mine sites laden with Wabco tyres, dongers, fleet vehicles and water tanks. The brown bomber he'd taken before setting the plantation alight was wearing off. The first waves of fatigue and nausea began to tremble through his body. He hadn't eaten for 36 hours. He had 13 bombers left but wanted to save them, the last of his father's stash. His father often went a week without sleep. He was fine for the first few days until he began shooting the speed every hour, and then his head went sideways and his paranoia grew. Lee would get the guns together and hide them in the shed, except for the Luger, which never left his father's belt. There were pine plantations now. Lee wiped his eyes, and then there were strawberry farms, plots growing cabbage and lettuce, and he could see the conical hats of Vietnamese in the fields. He tuned the radio and found a university station that was playing a Beasts of Bourbon track. Lee's music was in the trunk out back. Saxon, Slayer, Anthrax, Black Sabbath, AC/DC, Metallica, the new Megadeth, a whole lot of mixtapes. The only music in the deck was one of his father's Johnny Cash compilations, bought at a Payne's Find service station when Lee was 11 and they were returning from one of their missions, leaving caches of weapons and